All right, Travis, we're going to start right now. If you could just introduce yourself and give us a little bit of a background, please.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Everybody's sitting so far back.
Yeah, I think, can everyone hear him? All right.
Yeah, cool.
All right.
We're gonna start now. Travis, you can take the floor. Do you not wanna read the bio? Yeah. So Travis is the founder of Hydroflask and co-founder of Cindy. Hydroflask being founded in 2009 in Bend, Oregon. And Travis and Sydney, who previously ran a signage company together in Hawaii, had an estate sale and moved in with his mother in Oregon to buy the first batch of 1,500 Hydroflasks. I'll let Travis, give a little bit of an introduction himself, but we'll start now.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, yeah, that was fairly accurate. My name is Travis Rosbach. I'm originally from Salem, Oregon. I took off down to the Caribbean, U.S. Virgin Islands to go become a dive master and a dive instructor. And then later on, I became a boat captain and an airline pilot, flew charter jets out of Florida, and then met Cindy, and we started a few businesses together. We moved back home to Bend. I'm originally from Oregon. Moved back home here and started a fence company. That went real well. We sold it, moved out to Oahu, started a sign and banner printing company, kind of an agency, I guess, if you will. Then I had the idea one day for Hydroflask. It just kind of hit. I was going out to go buy a water bottle and at the local sporting goods store, and they didn't have any. And I was like, all right, well, fuck it, I'll do it. And so started doing Hydroflask after the idea came. Went off to China, found a factory that said yes, and ended up leaving Hawaii, moved back home to Bend, and things started to get pretty tough. Cindy left, and then it was just me running Hydroflask, and we had multiple ups and multiple downs, and started picking up more employees and more accounts and sales reps and things like that. Just started growing and growing. And after about 5 years of running Hydroflask 24/7, I decided that it was time to kind of exit and go do other things. And so started the Tumalo group, where I essentially help others get their entrepreneurial journey going. We help doing sourcing and manufacturing, some with financing and raising capital, and product design, engineering, all that kind of good stuff. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
And so we'll just be opening it up to any questions, or I can start if anyone doesn't want to. Anyone wants to start with general questions? So for one, just we were wondering, like, could you shed? I mean, you already did a bit, but like shedding light on what it felt like in the very beginning in the process when you were starting, like Hydroflask, and how you came up with that, which you did a bit. But
well, it was a lot of work. There were a multitude of factors that we had to overcome. The biggest one being that nobody had ever done a vacuum wall, double insulated, vacuum insulated water bottle before. And so we had to find the factory that would even be willing to manufacture it, and had a heck of a hard time finding anybody. So I just showed up in Shanghai one day and went to a factory, and the factory turned out to be plastic water bottles. That wasn't going to work. So as I was just kind of starting to get disappointed that the whole trip was for naught, this guy came up and said, hey, I got a cousin down in Hangzhou who helps source factories. You should go see them. It's like, okay, cool. So took off to Hangzhou and met this couple who, for the next 3 or 4 days, we drove all around Jinhua and Yinkong, which is kind of the metals capital of the world, really. They manufacture more metal products than anybody else on the planet. And after about the fourth day, we finally found a factory that said that they'd be willing to help us out and give it a shot and see how it goes. And that was awesome, but it was also just the start. We had to buy the molds, which are quite expensive, and do some more engineering and design work and things like that. And so I flew back home to Hawaii, and I mean, we literally sold everything we had. And she had a suitcase, I had a suitcase. We showed up at my mom's house and ordered 3,000 bottles. And after about 3 weeks of trying to build the business, waiting for the bottles to get made, and just all the marketing costs and just startup costs, we blew through a lot of that money. So we ended up just ordering 1,500 in the beginning of the first run, and it showed up. We took it up to Portland, to the Portland Saturday Market, and we're selling bottles just on the side of the train tracks. There was like a Max rail that ran through the Saturday Market, and the woman running the Saturday Market didn't believe that anybody would ever buy any water bottles. That was unheard of. People just don't drink out of water bottles at that time. So she wouldn't even let us into the market. But she did let us go out by the railroad tracks. And it actually worked out to our advantage, because the first day we sold a lot, the second day we sold a lot, but then the second week we were there, a lot of the customers that had purchased from us the previous weekend showed up to buy more. And they lined up around the block and in front of her office, the woman running the market. And she got kind of upset. And so she came out to find out what was going on, and come to find out it's this water bottle company that's actually now selling water bottles. So she led us into the market, which was just awesome. I think that was a huge first step of our growth. And we were doing markets here in Bend. We were doing Munchin Music, Friday night movie nights or whatever in the park and stuff. And one of the local newspapers came and did an article on us. And so the following week, a guy came up and said, "Hey, we saw you in the newspaper. And, I'm a sales rep. Can I rep your bottles?" And I had no idea what a sales rep even was or how that worked. But I was like, "Yeah, sure. What do you need?" And he goes, "Well, we need 24 bottles to start." And I was like, "Well, that's a lot for us, but okay." So we gave it to him on good faith. And about 5 days later, he calls back and is like, "However much inventory you have, I want it all. I sold it." Like, oh, geez. So we ordered the next 1,500 bottles. They came in, and by the time they came in, he had already sold those also. So we ordered another 10,000 bottles, and it kind of just started going like that. It was just like exponential growth pretty straight away. And before we knew it, like, we were doing 40,000 bottles a month, and had 10,000 square foot warehouse and a bunch of employees. And again, my partner, she bailed multiple times, and finally she was just out. It was just too much for her to take, but brought in a lot of good people to help with graphic design and CFO and attorneys and just everybody you need to kind of run a real legit business. And yeah, so that's kind of the early days.
That's awesome. Okay, sorry. So then maybe you could elaborate on some of the early pain points you faced with all that momentum early on.
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest pain point was the fact that we had to purchase the bottles up front. And so we had to pay, water bottles, even today, they cost $5.50. The price hasn't really changed since 2007. And which isn't a lot of money, but if you times it by 40,000 a month, it all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, how do I possibly fund this? So brought in a lot of friends and family to begin with, and credit cards, and just straight debt. And then as we were growing, it became fairly obvious that, 250 grand and up every single month was just too much. So that's when we started bringing in the VC funds and private investors, which helped a lot. but at the same time, it kind of brings in a whole new like Pandora's box of stuff that you got to deal with when you bring in investors. So I would say that the financing of it was sort of one of the biggest pain points I had no idea that, like, I knew that if you don't sell enough, you could go out of business, but the fact that you can sell too much and be too successful and go out of business, that was a fairly new concept for me to grasp. And, but one that I picked up pretty quick.
Okay, we have a question. Do you want to come up and ask? All right, yeah, he's gonna come up. He's gonna come down.
Can you?
That's on.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, you
sick.
can
I guess I'm down. Can you expand on what were some of those problems with becoming too successful?
Yeah. I think, I mean, again, it kind of goes back to the financing of it. The general idea was, well, if we're paying $5.50 and we're selling them for $20, we've got a pretty good margin and we should be able to cover expenses and hopefully make a little bit of profit at that point. But by the time you start adding in leases and employees and benefits, and then we had to bring in a HR team, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. And we still had to have the $5.50 per 40,000 bottles. And that was typically 120 to 150, 180 days even before we would have any kind of ROI on it. And so we had to front a lot of cash up front. And as people started kind of waking up to the idea that there was a need and this was a viable product to have a water bottle as an everyday carry item, the popularity just started to swell. And as it did, we started to have would-be competitors come on. And we were fairly successful in the early days, knocking out the straight patent infringers. But then people fairly quickly learned how to get around the patents and start up other competing companies. So in order to maintain our space, our place in the market space, it was very expensive because we had to always be ahead of the game with our inventory. And it was extremely difficult to know what kind of inventory, any kind of forecasting or projections would just go right out the window after the first like 2 months. All of the projections were just like, we blew right through them and just kept going. We're going at about 600% a quarter growth. And bringing on employees was extremely difficult because, again, we didn't really have a lot of capital to spend. And so we didn't really have enough money to pay a fair, honest, decent wage for people who were talented and gifted to do what we needed them to do. And so in the early days, it felt like we were just kind of bringing in warm bodies to just do whatever they could do. And a lot of them weren't really great at doing anything, but it was just a warm body to answer the phone or ship a bottle or do something like that. So as we were growing, we needed a higher and higher caliber of employee, which again goes back to money. You need more money for more employees and for better employees. So that was another big part of the challenge. And then, just maintaining the shelf space it was a matter of having inventory. And if we were out for a month or two, and if the customer couldn't get the bottles, after about a year and a half, we started to see some competitors, pretty serious competitors, pop up. And we knew that if we weren't able to get the bottles, well, we're going to lose all that shelf space. So I would say those were kind of the biggest pain points was financial, and then also just the caliber of employees. But there was a real shift once the money came in and once we started hiring really good employees and an HR team to hire really good employees. Well, then we could kind of fill out some of these graphic design and marketing and sales arms and wings and teams of the business. which was awesome. And then another pain point came was that the sales reps kind of start multiplying like rabbits. Like one sales rep knows another sales rep who knows another sales rep. Pretty soon we're all across the country with sales reps, but somebody has to take care of the sales rep. And they're not a direct employee. They're like a 1099 contractor, but they are even more needy than a real employee. Like they have lots of needs. Some of them are kind of prima donnas. So we need to hire people just to wrangle the cats of the sales rep world. Yeah. So I'd say money and people is always tough in the early days.
All right, thank you for that. We have another question. Do you want to just a second? You know, can everyone join the Zoom link? vCourses announcement was just posted.
So hello, my name is Arturo.
Hey.
So when I think about water bottles, I tend to think about the name Hydroflask and to be associated. And I wanted to ask, kind of, and pick at your brain, what kind of processes or things did you do in order for you to create Hydroflask as a quote unquote name of water bottles? Because people don't even sometimes think about it as a water bottle. It's more of like, oh, where's your hydro, right? So I wanted to ask that. How did you create the staple name of that market?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that I put a lot of thought into, even from like the early days, day one. Originally, I think that 5%back.org was, it came in about the exact same day, if not one day later, where we wanted to have a give back program. And after I sold, of course, big corporations are big corporations, and they ex-nayed that. They picked up their own, some sort of campaign with Park Service or something. But in the very early days, I always saw Hydroflask as as a commodity, you know, like Q-tips. Well, Q-tip is a brand, but they're cotton swabs. Kleenex, well, they're tissue, but Kleenex is and there's some name for this. It's some fancy name. You guys probably know it better than I did, but it becomes basically the vernacular. They're not nut huggers, they're Speedos, right? And so that's kind of how I saw Hydroflask was, it's not a water bottle, it's a Hydroflask. And so I started first with myself, was like, I stopped using the word water bottle altogether. So anytime I talk to anybody, I have Hydroflask. They're double wall vacuum insulated water bottles. But I would always, start out with the double wall vacuum, as opposed to, this is a water bottle company, Hydroflask, double wall. And so it kind of became like an elevator pitch, something that I was easily reciting in my sleep, basically. And then as we started gaining employees, it was the same thing. Even our customers was like an educational experience. Like, no, this is not a water bottle. This is a Hydroflask. Well, what's the difference? Well, this is double wall vacuum insulated, and we could give all these, wonderful benefits of having this Hydroflask versus any other brand would just be a water bottle. It was nice because we didn't have any competition. We started this space. So we started out as Hydroflask was the very first double wall vacuum insulated water bottle. But then as there were more coming in, anybody else, Yeti, Clean Canteen, Swell, anybody else who came in with a double wall vacuum insulated water bottle, it was always in comparison to Hydroflask. I mean, so we were lucky in the sense that we were able to be at the forefront of this new product space. The other thing I did a lot was just study the big brands. Like, what does Coca-Cola do? Coca-Cola is basically a cult, and it's basically a secret society. And if you buy a Coca-Cola, you're in the club. If you drink it, you know. If you don't, you don't. And so I looked at, like, what does Coca-Cola do? What does McDonald's do? What are these big players that aren't, I mean, we didn't have any big players in our space, so obviously at all. So I went to outside our space to see what the big corporations do. How are they mass influencing their audience? Spent a lot of time in China and spent a lot of time on mainstream media here in the States and looking at the propaganda. The propaganda machine is selling you their agenda. And we see that today more so than ever. We see people pushing their agenda via the mainstream media. So how are they doing it? How are they doing that successfully? And how can we emulate this? Because we're not selling sugar water. We're not selling something that can kill you, in 30 years, i.e. fast food. We're selling a really good, honest, healthy product that's going to benefit people's lives. So that was a big asset that we had, is we're doing good things and people started to feel better. And as they started to feel better, they directly associated this Hydroflask with feeling better. So it was easier for them to go out and share that with their loved ones and the people they just meet in their everyday life. And I think that the intention was just always set that this is Hydroflask. This is not a water bottle. This is completely different, even though it's a water bottle. It's completely different than a water bottle. It's a Hydroflask. And so starting with that DNA, starting the company with that, it now, all these years later, it just kind of grew up with that as a part of its DNA. Hope that answered your question.
Yep. So we have a couple more questions. The first one is, do you want to do?
Yeah, I just want to ask, so like, knowing that you created this product and you created the brand name Hydro, like, I just wanted to know, like, how does he feel as an entrepreneur when he walks around and sees people use this product on a day-to-day basis?
Did you hear that, Travis? Or should I want me
I
to
think,
repeat?
like, how do I feel nowadays when I see it? Is that basically the question?
No, like basically, like when you see people, like when you walk around and you see people using Hydroflask, like how does it feel? What's that feeling like?
It's a little bittersweet, honestly. I really enjoy the positive environmental impact that we've had. I really, really enjoy the fact that there's competition and there's sort of knockoff and come along products and brands out there that are reducing the plastics in the ocean and the landfills. I absolutely love that. I absolutely love the fact that when I see people with water bottles in general, or reusable stainless steel tumblers or whatever mugs that their products, whatever they're using, I love that because I know that it's less plastic in the environment as a whole. I absolutely love that. I enjoy every day. There's 15 new pop-up water bottle companies, it seems like. Well, no matter how well they do, they're saving plastic from the environment, which is awesome. So that's the positive side of it. The negative side of it is, like, I kind of feel like Hydroflask was, I don't want to say stolen from me, but it was kind of wrestled from me. And like, I personally don't have anything to do with them. I don't make any money. I don't even drink out of them. I think they're far superior products at this time and age. I think the technology's changed and they haven't quite kept up. So that side's a little bittersweet. But yeah, I mean, I've been from France to the Forbidden City in China and, Iceland and South America. Like, I've seen Hydroflasks all over the world, and that is cool. Like, that's really, really cool. But again, like, for me, the coolest part is knowing that whoever I see that's holding a Hydroflask, that person is more than likely aware of the climate issue at hand. Like, they're going to be the type of person who's reducing, reusing, and recycling, right? Like, anybody who's got the right mindset to use a reusable metal bottle versus plastic they're going to be, fairly good people, and their whole life is going to be like that. And I hope that Hydroflask in some way, shape, or form kind of helped create that belief in that person, or those habits in that person, I guess. Yeah.
That was great. All right, we have a question in the chat from Mansoor. Let me just read it out to you. What was it like approaching investors with a physical and traditional product instead of the usual tech or software products that scale easily? Were they dissuaded by growth potential? And then I think there's a second one. Was there any strategy to achieve the startup like growth in your product space besides hiring more people?
I think that as far as investors go, don't know that I necessarily knew that there was a traditional space like tech or software. So I didn't have any of those biases or, preconceived notions that it was going to be difficult or that we weren't in the tech space or the software space, because that wasn't a real big deal back in 2007. There wasn't really Shark Tank. We didn't really know about investors and how all of this worked. So I didn't use that. I didn't have any biases. I'm naturally quite curious and inquisitive. So I just went at it head first, not really knowing that it wouldn't work or that there was any reason why it couldn't work. And I think personally, that that hard goods are easier to raise money for. I mean, for our clients at the Tumala Group, we find it's way easier to raise money for a tangible hard good product. A lot of times, there's software investors and there's hardware investors, and the hardware investors that can hold a product and they can have it in their hand and they can look at it and touch it and feel it. It's a tactile sensation. It's easier for them to invest. So the strategy to achieve the startup like growth in your product space. Well, again, I mean, it was cool because, I should say a few things were happening in the water bottle space. There was a company called SIG that was doing aluminum water bottles, and they had a coating on the inside, and they lied to their customers and to the world, and they said it was BPA free. Well, BPA was just coming out as a very bad female growth hormone that was added to plastics, and it was something we needed to avoid. So we walked into the space as SIG was exiting, and it was easier for us to take that real estate on the shelves, because not only were we completely BPA free, but it was even a step ahead of the single wall bottles that we were insulated. So the strategy was basically sell bottles to people who drink liquid, which in some aspects was awesome, because anybody who drinks liquid is a potential client and customer of ours. But then in other, parts of marketing and sales, it was a little bit more difficult because we had to be very strategic with where we spent our marketing dollars and our budgets and where all that went. And we couldn't just blanket canvas the whole entire planet, at least up front. So it had to be very micro specific. We found that outdoor sporting goods stores were our first demographic. And then like natural grocers was actually our second account that I ever picked up. And so that showed us that outdoors and fancy food were going to be two of our lanes that we could play in, at least until we had enough resources and gunpowder to go out and full on assault on the entire population at large. And again, we're selling a good product that made people feel better. And so who are you not going to sell to is always kind of my question, like who are we going to possibly exclude, and why would we exclude those, groups of people? So if different types of stores try to open an account, we'd say, yes, absolutely. If you feel like you can sell these Hydroflasks, then yeah, please do. And the vast majority were very successful at that.
Awesome. I think we have another question. You wanna? Yeah.
Hey, thank you for being here. It's very interesting. You were talking about plastic before, and I wanted to ask you about your bottles. So reusable bottles offer like a greater environmental benefits only after they have displaced a sufficient number of disposable alternatives, that is plastic, for instance. Because I guess like mining at a minimum, the weight of transportation of your products and the energy that you use for production is also, it has a environmental
Impact.
it's energy, uses a lot of energy. So I don't think that we should consider plastic as evil.
Right.
I wanted to ask you, like, how many times do you need to use your bottles for that? It's so that the relative environmental burden from disposable alternatives is compensated.
Yeah, well done. Yeah, that's awesome. Leave it to the Berkeley crowd to ask that question. That's great. Well done for putting that together also. So I looked at that as a couple different like pieces of the puzzle. Carbon offsets just started kind of coming out around the same time we started to really grow. So we started buying carbon offsets, and I mean, we would methodically keep track of every airplane that I was on, every road trip that we took to go to a trade show. We would keep track of the mileage, and then we would keep track of all of the resources that it took. Hey, thanks for moving to the front row. That's great. Now I can see you. Hi, I like your gold shirt. So we kept track of all that. We were able to start buying carbon offsets very early on in the business, which it felt better. It felt like at least we were doing as much as we could at the time. I also look at it as all of the plastic bottles. Well, I shan't say all, but 99.8% of the bottles that have the plastic bottles, the single-use water bottles, are also made in China. They're just made in a different province. And so they're shipped over and then filled up and then shipped back out. And so I kind of looked at it, was like, well, those two kind of negate each other. And I think that no, plastic water bottles, plastic itself isn't necessarily evil. I definitely don't think that. I do, however, realize that people don't go out. Like if I go on a road trip, I might have a metal bottle with me, but if it's empty, I still need water. So what am I going to do? Well, I go to the store and I buy water. Well, how am I going to buy water? Well, it's going to be in a plastic container. So I realize that it's not the plastic that people are, craving or wanting, or, I really want to spend my money on plastic. That's not it. I want to spend my money on water. Right now, the transportation device of water just so happens to be plastic, until somebody can come up with a better solution than transporting water in clear plastic. And cardboard's been tried, hasn't really worked out all that well. People want to see what's in it. They want to see clean, pure water. And right now, the best that we have as of, what is this, February 18th, 2022, right now it's clear plastic. So my hope is that in the future, we can figure out a new substrate that is really good for transporting water. But until then, we've got plastic, and it's the contents of the plastic that we're looking to get. So I guess this is something that, like, I feel like I'm rambling here, but my mind kind of boggles at this conundrum. Like, this is my next kind of thing that kind of keeps me awake at night, is I don't want to buy the plastic on a road trip, but I need the water on a road trip. Where do I get the water? Well, I can't just go to the gas station and open up the faucet and get clean, pure water. So I have some ideas, but I think it's really going to take greater minds than mine to come up with what's next for that. Did that answer your question at all? Awesome. Yeah, cool.
Hi, I really like your set on your place. Is that a real TV? It's like a TV or is a fish?
Yeah, no, it's YouTube.
Okay.
If they start fighting, let me know and I'll tap on the glass.
So I have like kind of two questions. Maybe I can sum up in one. So being the first disrupting a market is not always easy. And when I talk with investors, they always ask like, who else is working on this, right? So in your personal point of view, like how you feel when, or if you have that adopts from investors or people that wants to join your company, and for other side, like you were feeling a bit lost or crazy because no one was working the same idea, like you were like, maybe, yeah, I believe in this, but maybe it's not going to happen because no one had tried before. So yeah, I don't know if I.
Yeah, it's a conundrum. It can be difficult because there's a very real sort of catchphrase in business that the first to market doesn't necessarily profit. It can be nice to have somebody who is the forerunner, the forefather, the trailblazer in any industry, who can kind of set the standard and say, hey, look, this is how it's going to be henceforth. And then anybody who comes in after that, it's easier for them to kind of pick up some of that market segment after the education has been already dispersed. We didn't have that luxury, but there was Nalgene, there was SIG, Clean Canteen had a single wall. So it wasn't necessarily that there was no market for it, but the double wall vacuum and insulated side, it felt like a very natural time. When I walked into the sporting goods store in Honolulu, there was this big wall that was, it used to be full of water bottles, like 5 or 6 shelves, big wall. And there was 2 left. And I asked him, I'm like, what happened? And he said, well, there's the stuff BPA. And at that time there was only Nalgene and SIG. And so I'm like, well, who's going to fill up this shelf? And the guy said, nobody. There's nobody else to do this. And there really wasn't. But so I guess I should say, so it was like, it was a little bit easier in that aspect, filled those pre-existing shelves back up where the Nalgene's used to be with Hydroflask. I got to Whole Foods the very first day we got the bottles in, and went into Whole Foods. Who do I talk to about water bottles? Well, that's not really a thing, but go talk to Evan in the back. You go find Evan. Evan's down on the floor and he's taking out the SIG because SIG had BPA and there's massive lawsuits. So it was like a 1-to-1. He says, here's the shelf space where SIG used to be. Now it's yours. So now here's Hydroflask. So it was a pretty easy plug and play. And so we got kind of lucky for that. Being the early, being the first, though, can be extremely difficult. It can cost a lot of money and a lot of marketing most of the time. I felt like, well, we don't have a lot of money. So what we really want to do is make sure that we take care of our customer base. Because if we can get reoccurring sales and if we can have our customers be our sales reps, well, then that's going to make it a lot easier for us. If they spread the message, then we don't have to spend so much to spread the message. So we took a lot of good care, lifetime warranty, wonderful customer service. A lot of times we'd, in the shipping department, we would add stickers or hats, or sometimes I'd go add $100 bill to the order, just as a surprise, just to kind of keep people happy with us as we were growing and kind of, I guess you could say buying the loyalty. But once they got the product and once they started to hydrate and once they started to feel better, well, then they wanted to tell all their friends. They wanted one for their kids and for their spouses and for their neighbors and their coworkers, and they wanted it for their employees. And so that we had on our side. But I agree that, like the first person to introduce a whole brand new concept, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be expensive, and it's going to take a lot of the right people who actually get it. And investors, a lot of times they'll be the first to admit they don't get it. It might not be for them. I mean, they're investors. They live in this world. And most of us, we live down here on this plane, and we know that we have issues or we have problems or we have things that we need in our lives, which they don't really have that problem in their lives. They've got nannies, they've got gardeners, they've got maids. They don't really understand what it's like. They've kind of lost touch with what it's like to be a broke college student who needs a product. And so friends and family rounds are typically a really good place to start. And after the friends and family is exhausted, hopefully by that time, you'll have gathered some clients or some customers that love your product or love your brand, and they're willing to invest. And so just ask, like, who's got money? We're looking for money. We're looking to grow. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely answer that. And also in terms of gathering people in your team without having money and with a disrupted idea, how you get this sales rep at the first place and how you grow the team at that really early stage when you were less than 10 employees.
Yeah. So I think the gosh, so how did we grow the employees? Yeah. I'm sorry.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, like how you get people working with you with a disruptive idea that no one, like you cannot compete, like, like I'm competing with Stripe, so I can say like, well, Stripe is doing this and I'm doing this, like in your
Oh, okay.
have something to um, just the vision, right? Like how you get this team
Convince
up
them?
and
Like, how do you convince them?
yeah, how to convince them to work with you at the really early stage.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, a few things like I think that, I think that I kind of just swallowed the fact that people may think I'm crazy or just a few screws loose or just insane, and it's like, okay, well, that's fine. If that's that, that's that. But let's see what happens in a year from now. Let's see what happens in 5 years from now. Let's see what happens in a decade or 100 years from now. And if they laugh at me in a decade and then fine. But realistically, if this doesn't work in a year from now, fuck them. Who cares? Like, I don't care if people are laughing at me that it didn't work, because I'll move on to the next idea and the next idea. So convincing people, I found that, in the early days, it's difficult because we were on like Craigslist advertising for people. And we had, minimum wage was like, I don't know, $8 an hour back then, or $10 an hour. And that's all we really had to pay. And so I don't think that it was they were there for money. They weren't there because of the brand. They weren't there for loyalty to the product or because they believed in it. They were there just to make cash. And so I think that, knowing that and utilizing them to do certain jobs. And then when we did start to find fans that were actually customers, those customers made the best employees. Then we could use those customers to do the copy, to do the marketing, to do the sales, because they were in love with the product. And then it was easier for them to sell the product or to write about the product or to help push forward the product. While the other people who, or maybe they're just for a paycheck, well, they're going to be great at doing more mundane, shall we say, tasks like shipping or laser engraving, or, we kind of found their niches for them to work. And then the other thing, like serendipitously, we had an investor fly in to meet with us, and he was on a connection flight into Redmond, Oregon, here into Bend. And he just so happened to sit next to this woman who had a Hydroflask. And he asked her at the start of the flight, like, hey, what do you think of that? And again, like, this is early 2009, 2010, where we didn't have full market penetration, nor especially saturation. And so he asked her, like, what do you think? And he said she talked for 2.5 hours about her water bottle and how good she felt. And so it was like a little bit of luck and a little bit of serendipitous timing that the woman next to him just so happened to have a Hydroflask. So by the time he came and heard my spiel, it was a lot easier for him to sign a check, because he had already got it was solicited, but it was kind of an unsolicited testimonial from somebody out in the wild, which that helped a lot. And then I think the first part of the question was, how did we pick up our first sales reps? Trade shows. Like, we would just go to trade shows and put up the booth. And we got kind of lucky. It was kind of funny. At the first outdoor retail show we went to, again, not a lot of money, we took bamboo and just constructed this 10-foot by 10-foot like tiki hut. And we were under these hot lights in this back room. And when the bamboo would get hot, it would crack and it sounded like gunshots. And everybody just freaked out, like, shit, somebody's shooting. And then once they realized, like, oh, wait, those aren't gunshots, something's happening back there, but it sounds like gunshots, people started to migrate back to see what in the world's going on. And like, hey, I'm a sales rep. Oh, I'm a sales rep. What territory are you in? What territory are you in? And so we just started collecting names, and the more like legit companies they worked with, the more legit we saw them. And you know, how many doors and what caliber of businesses do you work with, and all that we took into consideration. And then they, like I said, they just start to multiply. They seem to all know each other, and they all just kind of have a network. And so after you pick up like a couple, it's easy to pick up a lot more. And then, I mean, obviously, again, it goes back to having an awesome product that not only do the sales reps believe in, but the owner or the buyer or the store believes in, and their customer believes in. And then it's just like a trickle up effect from there. Does that help? Cool. Guess who's back? Back again. Oshkosh is back. Tell a friend. Guess
So-
who's back? Guess who's back?
So earlier you mentioned that it's very difficult to sell a new concept. Given the novelty of Hydroflask, how did you articulate that to your original team and then to customers when you were selling it?
You know, I'm a big advocate for what I call the elevator pitch. And it was actually kind of cool because I've been in situations where I've actually been in an elevator with somebody and had to pitch by the time we got to the top floor. So I have real world experience with elevator pitch, but I'm a big advocate for it too. I think the copy, like the words that you use, need to be as few as possible and as impactful as possible. And they need to be succinct as possible. You need to say as much as you can with as few words as possible in that elevator pitch. And so again, like I never once said water bottle. Like we did not have a water bottle company. We did not, you know, it was almost like a forbidden term, water bottle. It was always synonymous with Hydroflask. This is a Hydroflask. It's a Hydroflask. It's a Hydroflask. And so when we had the early employees come in, there was a little bit of a, I almost used the word brainwashing, but that's not quite it. It was almost like just a repetition. It's like training a puppy or training a child. It's like, it's just repetition. Nope, we're not doing water bottles. That might be another company, but now you work with us and this is Hydroflask. Oh, okay. And then pretty soon they would kind of shake their head and you could see the light bulb turn on, and all of a sudden, whoa, they're doing Hydroflask. And then they started to take a lot of pride in the fact that this is not just a water bottle company. This is a Hydroflask, and we're at Hydroflask now. And so that kind of loyalty and that brand loyalty and that culture kind of started to grow from there. And then the other part, which you have to be really careful with, but sometimes it can be a good thing. Those employees have friends and spouses or, you know, old colleagues they used to work with that they can then start bringing in their tribe as well. But, you know, I always take that kind of with a grain of salt. I have mixed emotions about it. Hiring a couple can be horrible because if they break up, you probably just lost 2 employees, not just 1. If they do wonderful and they decide to start their own little union, nothing wrong with unions, but if they start their own little, you know, cartel within, you got to be careful with that too. But for the most part, good people know good people. So if you can kind of tap into good people's good people, well, then you can kind of start going out of ways just off of the good people you have. Birds of a feather, right? You can't soar with eagles if you scratch with the chickens. So you just bring in eagles, pretty soon you got eagles. And as we started getting more and more eagles, we got rid of a lot of the chickens. That's a metaphor, right? We never did employ animals. So let's not get PETA after me.
I'm a genius. So
Did you figure out the mute?
Yeah, I'm learning it. Maybe by the time I'll graduate, I'll figure it out. But need to set realistic goals. So within that answer, you kind of touched on the importance of brand loyalty. And while I'm listening to you talk, like even though I never really understood the long-term goal of Hydroflask, you really like highlighted your passion. How did you learn how to do that? And what specific steps do you take to make sure that people within your team and then within your customers get that same engendered sense of passion for the long-term goal, even if it is just a water bottle?
Yeah, great question. That's a really good question. I think that sales has always been a part of my life. Like I've always been very interested in and passionate about and wanting to learn more about sales. And you see my fish went to sleep. So when I was, should we watch NWA straight out of Compton next, or should we watch the fish tank next? Maybe just do the fish tank. It'll be less controversial for this topic. Okay, there we go. So when I was living in the Virgin Islands, I was a dive instructor and dive master. We didn't have a whole lot of money. And in order to survive, we relied upon tips. As a boat captain, doing charters, on the yachts, doing charters, we relied upon those tips. And so being able to convey myself and to sell myself and to have other people have a good, if I can facilitate other people to have a good time, they're going to tip me more money. I'm going to have a better time going to the grocery store and buying better food. So my hand to mouth was because of my sales ability. And so when we started getting the first employees, it was that I was selling the employees the benefits of the Hydroflask. They started drinking water. They started feeling better. They started to drink the proverbial Kool-Aid, which is a cult metaphor, right? And again, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but I studied Coca-Cola. I studied cults. What do cult leaders do? How does a cult leader possibly take a group of people and get them all to commit suicide? Well, I know we're not doing that. We're doing the opposite. Like, how do I get a whole group of people to drink water and feel better, but drink water out of my container that we're selling? I say out of our container that we're selling you. And the basis is always good products, good outcome. You know, it's like the throughput. You put in good, you get out good. You put in cyanide, you get a bunch of dead people and there's no more followers, right? So if we put in a good water bottle with good water, well, they're going to feel better and then they're going to come back and they're going to want to keep redoing that action. You know, it's a hamster it's the mouse that, you know, gets the pellet and does that action because it gets the pellet versus going over here and getting the shock. We were giving out pellets, not shocks. So that helped a lot. We were giving out health and vitality, but really they were the one who filled it up with the water to do that. We just gave them the vessel to do so. Did that answer all of your question? Have you ever been to Oshkosh, the fly-in? Did you ever go there? Yeah. Oh, that's cool. That's the one thing it's always on my bucket list. I want to go to the fly-in in Oshkosh.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can. Hey.
Hey, so I was wondering what sort of process you went through in designing your product, and what were the reactions that you got when you first pitched your product idea to manufacturers?
Yeah. Okay. So I knew that like the only reference I had was Nalgene, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with Nalgene. It's basically like what the standard wide mouth Hydroflask looks like today, but it was plastic. So that was the only reference that I really had as far as what a water bottle was or looked like. But I knew that from drinking from them, it would spill, and it just wasn't it just doesn't, I felt like I'd get it all over my face and it just wasn't ergonomically awesome. It was a bit lame. And so I have a fair bit of experience drinking out of beer bottles back in the day. So I got some calipers and I started to measure, like, how big is a beer bottle? How much is a Minute Maid juice bottle? How much is a milk jug? How big, how tall? What's the thread pattern? How many ounces? How many ounces do I hold in every sip? How many sips in a bottle? What's the most beneficial ounces to ratio of size and space? And how big are the cup holders that people are going to be putting these in? And so I basically bought calipers and a soft tape measure, and I bought every bottle I could find on Oahu from as many different, we were lucky because we had all these different ethnicities around the island that had their own stores with their own products. So I could find products from all over the world on Oahu that I could then measure and pull from. It wasn't like I just went down to one store and bought 5 bottles. I went to 500 stores and bought 5,000 bottles. That's hyperbole, but I bought a lot. And then I just actually put this together last week for the first time ever. The very first Hydroflask I got up here, but it looks like a dive tank. It looks just like a scuba tank. I just subconsciously drew it out to look like a dive tank, unbeknownst to me until last week, which I find kind of a trip. That was the first version. I didn't like it. It was too tinny. They were too thin. The wall was too thin. The edges were too sharp. I didn't like the bottom. It just felt kind of cheap. The mouthpiece was too sharp and it just wasn't quite right. But those first 3,000, we could not get those back from the customers if we tried, because they loved them so much. So just because I didn't like it doesn't mean that the customer didn't like it. Our second version, we made the walls thicker. We made the mouth softer and taller and bigger. And then just probably, I think we had probably like 4 or 5 versions of the very first one. And then we went to a little bit wider mouth, which is now the standard mouth. They cut my narrow mouth, which a lot of other brands have now picked up and are finding that are selling extremely well. Hydroflask cut that after I left. And then we went on to the wide mouth, which is essentially like an open mold for Clean Canteen, Yeti, Nalgene. All of those companies use the same sort of thread patterns. It's just a little bit more universal ality, I guess, for the lids. Did that answer your question? It felt like there was maybe one other part right at the very end. Is that good? Yeah.
Yeah, so that answered my question about like the process you went through to design the product, but I had a question about like what sort of reactions manufacturers got when you pitched.
Oh yeah. Okay, that's right. Yeah. So at that time it was said that there were only 2 vacuums in all of basically the manufacturing planet, which was China. And so it was extremely difficult to get time on their machines. And they were kind of reserved for, there were a couple Japanese companies that were doing vacuum insulated, like these little milk containers. And so it was extremely difficult to find. Like, not only do we have to find manufacturers to build the bottle, but we had to find manufacturers who could build the machines to build the bottles. And so I would spend months going from factory to factory to factory. And some of them were just like a roll up, 1-man door roll up, and you'd walk in and there's a machine and there's, kids on the floor. Well, not kids, but a child on the floor. And there's usually the wife and the grandma and the husband and the dad are in the back, and they're working on making like a screw, and that's all they do. They spend their whole life making a screw, and that screw goes across the street to another factory and they make the part that makes, the machine that rolls the metal. And so we had to go, like step by step by step in piecing together the pieces that could then finally create these bottles. And at first we we did that. And then we started to find factories that were doing single wall bottles, like plastic and then metal, and kind of convinced them to buy a vacuum once our sales started going up. And then it got bigger and bigger.
I think, could you try speaking?
I can hear you. Cool.
Yeah.
I don't know where I cut off.
I think you were talking about Michael.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, originally, you know, it really helped that I had Michael, and he and I would go around from factory to factory and find people willing to take a risk on this endeavor. And then as we started to get sales and they started to grow, it made it a lot easier for us to either buy time in factories. And then eventually Michael started his own factory, and that made it a lot easier when, you know, it was kind of an in-house thing at that point. So that was hugely beneficial. But yeah, at first they thought I was nuts. I mean, they had no idea. I remember even when we got the first 3,000, and I had to call them and I was like, hey, we only need 1,500. That's all we can afford. They told me, they're like, we're going to have to scrap the other 1,500 because nobody's ever going to buy these. And that was kind of like an incentive. It was kind of like oh yeah, watch this. And so then it was kind of like a, I don't know, it was like a goal to sell the next 1,500, you know, and then they sold themselves and it started going up from there. And I started getting, like, people didn't think I was quite as crazy.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can. Hey.
Cool. Yeah, actually, just definitely you should play NWA in the back. I guess I have two questions. So the first one. Sorry, what was that?
Oh yeah, I'm tempted. I mean, I got to keep it.
Good. So the first question I have is, at any part of this, I guess like the early stages of growing your company, do you have doubts about like the future of Hydroflask, and like, and if you did, how did you kind of push through, and how did you motivate your team to like keep going? And secondly, could you just sort of like give a brief overview of how you approach financing and the rounds when you know, approaching investors?
Yeah, I had a lot of doubts. I think that there was definitely some sort of higher power. I don't know what that is called. That sort of gave me the idea that this would be happening. Actually, this is kind of interesting because you guys are at Berkeley. So when I went to the store to get the water bottles and the wall was empty, I asked the guy, I said, hey, what happened? And he said, well, they pulled them because of this stuff called BPA. And I asked him, I'm like, well, who's going to fill up the shelf? And I asked him that, and he said, there's nobody. And it came out of my mouth. I will do that. It just came out. And then he laughed at me. But in that time, from me saying that out the mouth and him laughing at me, I saw the future. I saw myself on stage talking to people, wearing a suit, a jacket, and talking about this really successful water bottle company. And it blew my mind. I was like, holy shit, I just saw the future. And so when he finally, you know, when he laughed at me, which was pretty instantaneous, but it felt like a lifetime, I'd already seen the future and that Hydroflask was going to be successful. And yet I can't imagine myself ever wearing a suit. You know, I was like, oh, that can't be real. Well, 10 years later, I was down there at Berkeley, and I'm up there giving the talk, and I looked down, I'm like, oh fuck, what am I doing wearing a suit? Oh, this is the vision I had. And it was like identical to the vision I had 10 years prior when the guy laughed at me. So I don't know, that's kind of cool that to be back here at Berkeley. So, but after that, then yeah, the doubts the doubts started. And again, the big one was just financing. I mean, we sold everything. We had nothing more to give. My family was tapped out. My friends were tapped out. We had given everything we possibly could. One of the hardest days was I had probably 5 or 6 employees, and I had a 10-year lease on these 2 buildings and all kinds of sales all across the States, but literally just had no more money. And I was getting ready to lay everybody off. And I wrote up the letter, and I'm, kind of, it was the hardest thing I ever did. And practicing this letter, and the phone rings, and there was a guy there to see me. I was like, no, I don't want to see anybody. Well, he's, fairly adamant, like, you need to either come and escort him out, or you need to talk to him. But either way, like, I can't handle this guy on my own. Please come forward. So I came forward and sat down with him, and he wanted a job. And I just kept telling him, no, not hiring, not hiring, not hiring. This is a Wednesday afternoon. And I was closing down the doors on Friday. And he was very persistent. He just kept pushing and pushing. And then finally he said, well, why? Tell me the truth. Is it me? What is it about me? Why will you not hire me? I said, well, the truth is we're out of money, and I gotta let everybody go and close down the business. And he goes, oh, well, what do you need? And I thought, okay, $1 million. And he goes, okay, so if I get you $1 million by Friday, could I start Monday? I was like, yeah, dude, sure. Let's just go with that. And he left, and I kind of wrote him off as just kind of a local crazy guy. And Friday morning, this guy walks in, and here I am with my paper, and I've called everybody into the conference room, and I'm ready to let everybody go. This guy comes in asking for me, met with him, and who are you? What's going on? And he says, well, I'm here to talk about investing in the company. It's like, oh, okay, this guy's crazy too. He's probably going to ask me for a job. We sit down, and he's like, what do you need? I'm like, I need 850,000 bottles. What do you think of that? Yeah, some big number. And he's like, okay, how much money? $1 million. And he pulled out his check. He wrote $1 million check, and it cleared. I was like, oh. It was like a semi miracle, really. And I really believe that act boldly and unseen forces will come to your aid. I really, really believe that. I saw that over and over again with Hydroflask and just in life in general. So I think that every time I hit upon a hard time, I think every hard time is a little bit different, and there's a little bit different exit strategy for that. And you may not know it until you're in it, or until after you've actually exited it. You never know when it's going to be a song or a book or somebody you talk to or something you see, or you never know what's going to give you that little bit of piece of, shall we say, like enlightenment to get you through your current circumstances. Lots and lots of doubt. And yet, luckily there was always just a little bit of light at the end of the rainbow that would keep me going for the next round of calamity and catastrophe. I felt like there was maybe a couple parts to your question. You have a couple. Another one was like, how do I look at like raising capital? Again, like credit cards, debt, everything we had, skin in the game, go forth with that. Friends, family, friends, kind of go and just kind of keep broadening the circles, just kind of keep those ripples growing. And eventually, I do believe that as long as you have a good product and you've got you're doing honest work, and you're doing, like your shit's legit, like people will see that and they'll flock to you and they'll come and they're going to want to help you. Was there one other piece of that question that I'm missing? That's good. Okay, cool.
I think we have one more question.
Hey man, it's Arturo again.
Hey.
I wanted to ask a question, not regarding more to the business, but kind of regarding to mentality. So during these hard times when you're running out of capital and basically about to close down, and you talked about a little bit of psyche, what kind of mind frame or frame of thought that you have when making these decisions and just moving forward? Because I know you said you liquidated all your assets. So what kind of psyche do you recommend having when making these decisions and moving forward within our businesses?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a little bit of you gotta be tenacious. Like you can't, and you gotta have thick skin, because people are gonna call you crazy or tell you can't do something, or you can't have what you want or what you need. So you got to be creative and not be willing to take no as an answer sometimes, or take that no, but figure out a way to kind of circumnavigate that over to another way to frame the question so that you can get to your yes. And that goes back to like negotiation and sales and stuff like that. But sometimes it's just sheer terror. Like sometimes I would just be so fucking scared that I'm going to have to fire people, and they're, like people's lives depend upon working here. And if I have to let them go, like, man, that would just be awful. I'm going to go completely bankrupt and lose all of my money, and like, that's just, sometimes that can be terrifying. But at the end of the day, I guess I always had like, there was this movie called Tommy Boy, which I'm sure a lot of you guys are probably too young for, but there was a scene where, long story short, Chris Farley sells himself to the waitress to get chicken wings. She goes in the back and she opens up the fryer and does the chicken wings. David Spade says, "Wow, you just got your first sale. How did you do that?" Chris Farley says, "Well, I've got the Meat Lovers pizza in the trunk. And so just in case, like if she wasn't going to sell me the chicken wings, we've always got the Meat Lovers pizza in the trunk." And for some reason that kind of hit me like, well, even if this doesn't work, I can always go back to being a dive instructor. If this doesn't work, I could always go get on a boat in the South Pacific somewhere and just live a good life. I may not ever, help change the planet or anything, but man, I'd have a lot of fun being on a dive boat. So like, no matter how bad it got, I knew I wasn't going to be like, hopefully wasn't going to be dead or in jail. I just go back to doing what I was doing before. Being a pilot, like if the engine catches on fire, you got to take, pretty drastic steps pretty dang quick. Being under the water and somebody having a heart attack or panicking, like you got to act pretty damn quick. Being in business, sure, you got to act quick, but nobody's going to die. There's no fires to put out. Like it's all, it's all kind of relative. And traveling around the planet and seeing death and awesome beauty and just amazing different things. By the time I got to Hydroflask and an order was late going out, it was like people would start freaking out. No, we're not going to get this order to this big account. We're going to lose the account. And people just, they'd start trying to set fires. And, I think in those times I could be kind of calm knowing, yeah, nobody's going to die. It's not a real fire. This is a proverbial fire. And, but that just kind of comes with experience, I guess. But I think also just every circumstance is a little bit different. And so if you're faced with a difficult time, just face that difficult time at that difficult time, and then move on to something else and then something else. The other thing I found lately is like, if you got something you got to do that you don't want to do, schedule it for another time. And then just know that at 11 o'clock on Tuesday, you're going to have to take care of that. So on Monday, if you start thinking about it, stop and just say, "Oh no, it's cool. Like I don't have to deal with that till tomorrow at 11. For me, that kind of helps so that I'm not in this constant state of, holy fuck, what's happening and how am I going to get through this? Because the more you step out and venture out into the realms of business and entrepreneurship, the more you're going to be faced with unknowns. And you got to learn and you got to negotiate and sell your way out of these circumstances and situations. But tenacity, thick skin, and perseverance, I guess. Tenacity and perseverance sound like that's kind of the synonymous. Sorry.
Oh, you're chilling. earlier you mentioned with respect to the first water bottle design, you were not a big fan of it, but the customers were. When you were doing product testing and market testing, how did you make sure that you were always paying attention to that discrepancy and not letting your personal opinions inhibit the performance of the product?
Yeah. Wow. You guys are so articulate. I should have gone to college. I think that I was just building a water bottle that I wanted to drink out of. And I knew what I did not like, and I knew what was not working. So that's what I drew up, and that's what we ended up making. And then when I saw that, sure, we'd made it how I thought about it, but it's not now, like now we go to V2, now we go to V3. And if you just kind of keep taking the good into the V2 and dropping the bad from V1 into V2 and improving upon the bad for V2, well, your V2 is going to be exponentially better than V1. And then the customers will start to tell you feedback. And when they tell you feedback, well, you just incorporate that into V3 and then V4. I think that one of the hardest things, well, I guess one of the most, what I think about with this question is, like when it came to colors, like what colors do we do? Well, Facebook was just kind of starting out, and it was just kind of not just for the young crowd anymore. It's kind of becoming more mainstream. So we could take polls and say, hey, what colors do you want? We'd have 5,000 people tell us what color they want. And if we like, purple was always just the most difficult color because there's 8,000 shades of purple, and there are 8,000 different people who like 8,000 different shades of purple. And it's extremely difficult for some reason with purple to find two people that like the same shade, or to get a unanimous consensus on a good shade of purple. So a lot of just asking, like, or maybe we knew we were going to do purple, and because we want to do purple, or because we feel like we haven't done purple before and now we want to do it. So then we'd say, hey, what shade of purple? We'd have 5 or 6 different shades of purple. But it's very difficult to ask, what shade of purple do you want? It's easier to give 4 shades and say, hey, which of these 4 do you want? Because by and large, the general population doesn't really know what they want until you give it to them. And then they're going to say, yeah, that's what we wanted, or no, that's not quite what we wanted. So the more you can ask them ahead of time, the better, but only up to a certain extent where they actually don't know themselves. And so you just have to take the shot and see if it hits. And if you miss the mark, you just kind of recalibrate and then shoot again. So there's a little bit of shotgun approach and a little bit of sniper approach on that, to use that analogy. Sometimes you got to start out with the shotgun and you just say, I don't know, what color do you guys want? Purple, yellow, red. And they'll get that, you'll get that feedback. And then once you, okay, well, we're going to go with purple anyway. So now we use the sniper rifle and we say, we got purple, here's 4 shades, you tell us. And then and then we still may not go with that color purple that people vote for whatever reason, but at least they feel like they've had a say in it. And 9 times out of 10, you give them what they want, they're happy. But sometimes you give them what they don't want and they're still happy. Sometimes you give them what they want and they're still not happy, And so, or you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was a really solid answer. And within that answer, you touched on how you guys were using Facebook for polling, even if it wasn't like super scientific. Did you guys use social media platforms for digital marketing?
It was just starting. And I didn't really know a whole lot about it. We owned a fence company and a sign company, and we weren't really on social media at all until Hydroflask. And that I think it was pretty much the exact same week that we got the first LLC and registered trademarks and URLs for Hydroflask was the same time I signed up for Facebook. And so by the time we had enough money to hire the social media department, like I was doing so much else besides that we started to bring in the people who actually knew about that kind of stuff. I'm always a big proponent of hiring people younger than me who can help keep me, like cool, hip, and relevant. And that was, social media was a big testament to that. And I think nowadays, I mean, a lot's changed. I think that social media, it's harder and harder to trust, and it's harder and harder to just, it's becoming more saturated, and it's harder and harder to sell products on, which I'm a big proponent for brick and mortar. That's a whole nother question or topic.
Can you expand on specifically why you're a fan of brick and mortar and what specifically you mean by brick and mortar?
I think retail shops, I think retail, there's a lot of talk, from a couple sides of the fence about brick and mortars. When I say brick and mortar, I mean like a retail store. Like you open the door and you walk in and there's products and you can purchase them and you can go home. And for me, that's brick and mortar. I think it's very relevant. I don't think that that's going anywhere. I'm hoping, and what I'm seeing is that it's sort of changing. We're getting away from these kind of big corporate box stores and these kind of big companies. But at the same time, they're the ones who kind of killed the mom and pop corner shop. And my hope and my dream is that we can bring American manufacturing back, and we can start harvesting more American ingenuity and entrepreneurship. And it'll be a quicker drive from the factory to the stores. And then the people can walk in. I'm a big advocate for being able to touch and feel and smell and get the tactile sensation of a hard good product. Because it's one thing to order something online and hope that it may, and like how many times have we ordered stuff from Amazon because it just looks awesome, and then we get it and we're like, what the fuck, this is shit, like what am I doing paying $20? I don't want to pay $20 for this. And then you're in this conundrum, like, well, do I send it back? Well, it's only $20, but it's $20. Yeah, but it's kind of cool. No, it's not like it was advertised. But if you walk into a brick and mortar, you wouldn't even give that thing a second look. Or you might look at it and be like, wow, it's $100, but man, I just love it. This is awesome. I really need this. I love this. So that's why I like brick and mortar. And the other reason is people may not buy it at the brick and mortar, but it kind of acts as like a sales agent. Like people may walk in, they may pick it up and say, wow, this is really cool, but yeah, it's $20. I'll come back to this later. And then they'll be online and then they'll see it and then they'll click purchase, buy now. And then they'll have got it. And subconsciously, a lot of times it's subconscious, sometimes it's conscious. They touched it at the brick and mortar before they bought it on the line.
Great.
And I also think, sorry, I just feel like I'm rambling. I also think that a lot of the younger generation, millennials and Gen Xers, are kind of forgetting about brick and mortar. And if for whatever reason the internet gets shut off tomorrow and we can no longer purchase from our favorite salesperson, and we can no longer make them a trillionaire, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go down to our local neighborhood store and go purchase our goods. And so my hope is that neighborhood store is here with good local products that are made here locally or as close to home as possible. I'll get off that soapbox now.
Hey again.
Hey.
My name's Ani, by the way. So I had one question about since you guys were so like early in the space, how did you balance like getting more people on board with not kind of like compromising your competitive advantage, and like did you kind of like get any patents or anything like that, especially later on?
Oh, like competitors, you mean?
Yeah, like how did you get more people on board with you guys, but not give away kind of like, I guess your secrets, or like, how do you like balance that and stuff?
Well, yeah. When you say get more people on board, you mean like
yeah, your team, grow the company and like.
Oh, okay. Well, we did have, unbeknownst to me, corporate espionage is real. There are professional muckruckers who get hired to come in and cause a ruckus. We had one individual specifically who actually, come to find out, she worked for one of our competitors, and she was hired to come in and work for us also, and to give out our secrets to our competitor. That was a fun awakening. It's difficult. I mean, it's really difficult to know. It's difficult to have, when you don't have the money, to know what kind of morals and values the people are that you're hiring. And I mean, money helps. I mean, let's face it, the more money you have, the higher caliber people you can hire, the longer term they are, the more hopefully you're going to find out from their background that they've got good morals and values and scruples and stuff like that. When it comes to competition, it's having patents is nice, having trademarks is nice, but then the follow-up to that is you have to have the money to enforce it. The trademarks and the patents are only as good as the money you have to enforce them. And, good people and bad people alike will come out and try to put out a better product, even though you've got trademarks and patents. So I think that we always kind of looked at the patents as keeping the honest, and it kind of gave us a good sort of 6 or 8 month jump start on the competition. And then after a while, people wanted, they saw how lucrative it looked to be in the space, and they wanted to come in. So they started going around our patents. And, and so that was always bittersweet, because they're putting out products that are helping to eradicate single-use plastic. So it was kind of like, it was always bittersweet, like good, they're helping the environment, but dang, it's, taking a shot right at us. But there's always going to be enough room in the marketplace for everybody. I truly believe that. As long as you're good people doing good things, you've got good products, you take care of your customers, they're going to take care of you. You start doing shady shit, they're going to bounce. I mean, they can smell bullshit a mile away. And especially as I see the younger and younger generations come into the entrepreneurial space, I think it's awesome that, and I'll say you guys are able to smell bullshit further back and further away and call it out. And you're more inquisitive about, who is this corporation? What are their values? What are they really doing? What do their press releases say versus what they're really doing? Because you start pulling back those layers of the onion, you start finding nefarious activity at some of these big corporations. And then, aren't we glad they've got competition? Because now we can go to the good companies doing good things. Hope that helped. That was I can.
All right, Travis, thank you so much for your time. Do you have any closing remarks or anything you wanted to say?
I just hope that didn't suck too bad. I hope you guys learned something. Yeah.
Oh, do you have one more? Some students are asking what's the best way to reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Travis Rosbach on LinkedIn, or info@tumalogroup.com, info@tumalogroup.com.
Well, thank you so much.
Wait, one more. Wow.
More questions. Sorry, I'm holding you up, but
No worries.
You seem like you have like a really solid work-life balance, whether that's realistic or not. What things do you focus on to make sure that when you are in those pain points or areas in which there's a lot of pressure, you don't kind of crumble under it? Like, what structures do you put in place? Like, do you work out, or I mean, you seem to have like a lot of nature shit in the back.
Yeah, good question. That's something I did not necessarily take into account early enough on. So I think it's really good that you're thinking about that up front, and then hopefully you can build in. Well, even if you don't know what you're going to build in, at least you have that recognition that when you are in those, sort of outside of work, in your happy zone, happy place, you can maximize those times. For me, it was flying jets and flying airplanes. Like, I love to go fast, and I just love to hurtle myself through time and space on big objects. Scuba diving has always been a big passion, because I can go underwater and nobody asks me for shit. Like, nobody's asking for anything. There's nobody coming at me. Nobody needs anything. No bills I have to pay. Nothing. I'm just down there with the fish. I used to ride my motorcycle quite a bit during Hydroflask, and same sort of thing. Like, I could get tunnel vision, like everything's trying to kill me. That rock is trying to kill me, that squirrel, that deer. But I've got tunnel vision going forward that I'm not going to die. And I don't think about bills. I don't think about employees. I don't think about any of that. I only concentrate on not being killed. And I love that. Right now, I have chainsaws and I go chop big trees and try not to die with the chainsaw. That keeps me, that's my happy place because I can shut off everything else. Yoga has been big. Meditation has been big. Breathing, practices have been big. And I think it's really important to have that balance. And I don't think it's realistic, and I don't think it's good to strive too much for those balances, especially in the early days. You're going to be out of whack. You're going to have, it's a 24/7 endeavor to have a startup. And so don't beat yourself up too much when you don't meditate today. Well, big deal. You can meditate tomorrow. At least you got your shit done today, and then when you do have time to meditate or whatever your outlet's going to be, then you can even cherish it a little bit more and be like, yeah, dude, that felt good. So I think that, whether it's just being out in nature, I think taking off our shoes and going into the dirt is good. Seriously fucking hugging a tree when was the last time you literally hugged a tree, right? And then really listened to it and felt that energy from it. All of that can be good. They even say having a, nature scene on your backdrop of your desktop, your desktop picture even helps. But physically going out into nature, I think is one of the best ways to do it. Also, especially down in California, go into the ocean, go into something so much bigger than you that could kill you at any given time, but it's not trying to kill you, but it could, but it's just, there's so much power in the ocean and it's so much bigger. So anything that I'm doing is so minuscule compared to this greater massive ocean that when I get into the ocean, it's just like, now, who are you? What are you doing? Why are you here? What are you complaining about? And then also traveling to third world countries, traveling to places where they're underprivileged. They don't have it as good as we do. A lot of times they're a lot happier than we are. I've met so many people in third world countries that laugh and sing and dance, and they're just way more jovial and nicer than our culture. Our culture has a sickness. I really believe that capitalistic communism, or not communism, we're headed in that direction, kids. I didn't say that. I think that, nature.
I think that concludes all our questions. Thank you so much for your time and all your insights, Travis. A quick round of applause for Travis. So yeah, we'll be ending it here, I think. But thank you.
All right. Yeah, cool. Thank you, guys. Thanks
Awesome.
very much. I appreciate that. See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks. See ya. Only one person fell asleep, it looks like, up there. All right. See you guys.
I'm not asleep.